And welcome to Conservative Talk.
And Justin and I have a very special guest. We have an international economist who's going to come on and talk about his latest book.
And welcome to Conservative Talk. My name's Justin.
And this is Jamie.
And as always, we want to take a quick moment to remind all of our viewers, making sure that they are hitting the like button and the share button on any of the content that they do come across on any of the platforms that we do release a show on, as well as making sure you are hitting the subscribe button as well. That way you will always stay up to date on anything that we do and anything that we do release. We also encourage our viewers to go to our website at conservativestalk.org and hit that sponsor tab in the upper right-hand corner or the lower right-hand corner and help us out with what you're able to. As we always say, you will be directly contributing to Jamie and I one of these days taking over the world, righting all wrongs, and making sure we don't have any of these horrific plans or horrific doomsday things that could go on in America, like we're going to talk about today.
I follow a time traveler on TikTok, and he releases dates of how bad things are going to get.
Yeah. Full disclaimer, that's Jamie. But with that in mind, Jamie, you want to give your first reminder?
Boycott hometown headlines. We continue to move the left out of Northwest Georgia, and it starts with you making sure you tell all your friends to boycott hometown headlines.
Yes, and we also want to take a moment to say a thank you to our affiliates, and our first one being Net News Network. So you can find Net News Network at netnewsnetwork.net. That's where you'll be able to find all sorts of on-the-ground reporting from local contributors across the country without having to go through mainstream media sources. We also want to say thank you to Veterans for America First. So Veterans for America First is the premier America First policy advocacy organization. And they really push a lot of this through their media arm, and their media arm being Vet Voice. So make sure you are checking out and looking for Vet Voice on every major social media and media platform. So, Jamie, how about you introduce us to who you've wrangled up towards today?
And we have a very special guest here for you all tonight. So thank you all for joining us. We have Joe Gulesserian, who's an author of a very big economic book that's coming out, the Practical MBA of Economics. And so we want to bring Joe on.
Yes, sir. Joe, you there? Can you hear us?
I'm here. How are you, gentlemen?
If we were any better, we don't know if anybody can handle it.
Yeah, I like that one. It's good. It's good. Yeah. So thank you for having me on your show.
Absolutely. We sincerely appreciate the opportunity to come in and speak with somebody that knows so much and is such an expert in the world of economics, especially when everything nowadays turns in that world.
Yes, it does.
I actually want to get started this way. So Joe, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and you're not a political scientist, but how did you get into economics and writing the book?
Okay. My background with myself is I've run companies for 30 years, primarily in consumer packaged goods. I had a flair for academia, so I did make it through school. I eventually went and did my MBA. I worked as a professor at college as well. I taught management studies, some of the real more complex courses like corporate finance and statistics. And I taught marketing, of course, that's my background. And so that really is about myself. And this is my second book, and I'm currently writing my third book. This one, incidentally, has been out since the summer, and it's doing very, very well. And that's about me. And I'm currently writing another book. I hope for it to be out by the summer, called The Guerrilla Guide for Entrepreneurs. And so this one here is out, and it's heavily weighted towards inflation. But, I think a colleague of mine who read it, he says, you know what it is? It's a history of capitalism is what it is.
Yeah. Fair enough.
And, I could tell you about the book or however you want to proceed. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I'll tell you what. Can you give us kind of an overview of what your book is about?
Well, I know I watched your show before I say this. I know that with your show, you guys are planning to take over the world. But first of all, if you read my book, forget about the world. You'll be taking over the solar system. Okay.
Absolutely.
So the world's not good enough. And Elon Musk will be calling you soon. So, but in all seriousness, I turned around and I looked at my old economic books, and they're so abstract, so mathematical, so yuck, some of it. And then I thought about what I really learned. And so it was very abstract and academic. So what I turned around and said, listen, everybody wants an equity of outcome. They want to do well in their lives. And I appreciate that, and I understand that. But if you don't have the input of knowledge, how can you do better? If, in this world, we've got to learn how to walk, we've got to learn how to use our computers, social media, so on and so forth, and get along in this world. But to go through life and not to understand economics, that's what I delivered in a really fun, easy way to read. And I take you on a journey that starts with currency debasement in Rome, the rise and fall of the British pound, the emanation of the United States dollar is the de facto currency of the world, the reserve currency of the world. I take you on a fast trip everywhere from the Great Depression, why FDR prolonged it, agitated it, made a bigger mess out of it. I take you through all the stock market crashes, our economic order from the Great Reset of the mid-century of last century, specifically Bretton Woods, the IMF, all these things. And then I start talking about specifically a lot of the symbiotic relationships with the Treasury, money printing, the US dollar going off, gold, and a history of sovereign debt default, and why I believe that most governments in the world are, for practical purposes, insolvent. And I get into monetary theory, money printing, all that inflation, and ways and how you can protect yourself, your family, and your business. Now I'm exhausted.
Well, Jamie, it sounds like you may have found a new hero.
Without a doubt. Like, I'm going through this and I'm like, I want to read it 3 times. Like,
there's 17 chapters, so yeah.
And there's so much of that's relevant, especially right now, And so, like, I want to ask this: what is causing all the current global inflation? Because at one point you could look at one sovereign and say, okay, like here's kind of what the issue is in that country, but we've reached a point now to where, banking and financially, we're all so intertwined that you can almost see the wave of economic issues go from one country to another. And that in itself tells a story. But I want to hear from you, what do you think is causing all this inflation?
It's very simple on a simple scale. It's called the Cantillon effect. And what that basically means in English is when you have more money chasing the same amount of goods, you get inflation. There is no example of inflation without expanding the money supply and, printing fictitious money. And I hate to say it, it's fictitious. It's not backed by anything except, your particular trust in government, whatever government it is, especially like Europe. Without money printing, they'd be finished. United States has the privilege of the reserve currency of the world. And pardon me, they can get away with more of this stuff than other countries. Canada, where I live currently, and I've lived in the States before, it can't print like the Americans because they can't back it, right? So there's inflation in a lot of the world, less so in Eastern Europe and less so in certain other countries that can't print money, right? If you can't print money, you need money, first of all, for looking after services. I get that part. But once in 1979, when President Nixon took the US dollar off gold, there was more money for propaganda, public education, and basically I've got more money to bribe you with your, so you vote for me. Will you vote for me? No.
Yeah.
It was a
terrible politician.
Well, well, I would say that you would be the right type of, in my opinion of it anyway. And it seems like coming off of that standard was kind of the first step into heading down to where we are now, kind of socialist light, almost heading into socialism, heading into full-blown communism, because we do see, and the first one came under President Trump here in the United States with the first stimulus check that came out during the COVID epidemic that was going on. And then you started seeing more of them come out. And then you started seeing the child tax credits being rolled out where they were being paid just because they have kids, but yet they were still able to receive that tax credit when they filed their taxes.
And Canada's faced a lot more of that than us. So I got to ask this question. With the current state of global fiat, do you see us ever going to a true cashless society?
I knew that was coming.
Well, you're going a few steps ahead of me, and you're like in our practical lives compared to when I was a kid growing up about 500 years ago. I'm debiting this, debiting that. I probably spend $9 to $12 a week of cash. And when you mentioned the word cashless society, and you're jumping ahead of me, and that's in the future of tomorrow in central bank digital currency. And I'll go there. And we can save the best for last, because that's where I paint in chapter 17 this dystopian society that integrates communism, capitalism, central bank digital currency, and it's called the future of tomorrow. But I will answer that as we go on. If you want, I could do it now.
Well, I'll tell you what. Before we jump into that, we were just talking about inflation,
right?
And right now, here in the United States, we are experiencing a new epidemic of inflation. I mean, it's to the point now to where we can't even go out and buy a 12-pack of eggs without having to take out another mortgage. I actually saw some memes that were going around of cartoon characters giving Valentine's. But instead of the Valentine's card, it wasn't a chicken. It was a carton of eggs.
Oh, I saw the one with the chicken instead of flowers. But yes, so with that, do you what about the CPI? Is that still a measurable tool that we use? Do you think there are other metrics that we may be able to use?
Well, when I was younger, I spent some time in the fictional section of the library, and I think the CPI could sit there very good beside Huckleberry Finn and Alice in Wonderland. And it would be good because, we got to really help with some of our kids to read today when they're in elementary school. So it'd be good for elementary, middle school reading. Now, once we get past that, and that was, don't take me away don't take me away yet. But in all seriousness, I'll keep it simple. And I didn't want to take a shot like that, but I couldn't resist it. But it's at about 6.6% officially under the CPI. That's primarily what the Fed goes by. But the methodology they used in the 70s and 80s and even early 90s up to was another method that's covered by a site called Shadow Stats, and I believe it's John Williams. Based on that, you're running through what you're telling me, eggs at 80%, groceries are up 10. I was just in California a couple of weeks ago. It's outrageous. So we're running at about 15 to 17% right now in effective inflation. And I'm going to show you a quick little trick. It's not, I don't want to get into the statistics. There's 24% inflation on insurance right now in the United States. So what they did is they go, we make what we call adjustments in the CPI, and they pulled it right out of the CPI to zero. And that's one way they brought it down. And Justin, Jamie, you're talking about stuff that people are feeling on their skin. They go out, and that's the word you use. It's a phenomenal analogy. I need a mortgage to buy some eggs. In Canada, it's about, I buy the cage-free ones at $8, $9. It's not in the States. I'm hearing $8, $10, $12. So you're up 50% on gas. You're up 80% on eggs. The thing that you need for kids and all of us to stay healthy is cereal. All these foods, you're up at about 15 to 17%. I'm going off the top of my head, so I'm trying to be reasonably accurate here. I could later send you a site, that breaks down inflation by category. And pardon me. Yes, the inflation is higher than that. Go to Shadow Stats, and you feel it everywhere. But they're goosing the numbers. The numbers are fixed. And wait till it's election time. The numbers will get fixed more as well, because that's what will happen right now. And I was just thinking, and I put a note here. And just so you know that the US Treasury and the central bank has to be separate. But it's not only the lady who's in there in the US Treasury right now, but they brought another one from the central bank outside of Janet Yellen is in the US Treasury. And the current president, Biden, has brought in Liel Bernard from the central bank to sit on the US Presidential Economic Advisory Committee. And I will tell you this story, and it's in my book, and I can extract it. In the Middle Ages, and I know you guys have studied history because you're poli-sci majors, so you probably read a lot more than me. But in the Middle Ages, the Pope would claim that he could ordain the emperor. But then the emperor said, no, I'm the one who can ordain the Pope. Both were galled by each other. So the question is, who's ordaining the White House? Is it going to be the central bank, or is the White House ordaining the king of the central bank, in this case, Jerome Powell, right? So that remains to be unseen, and that comes up later in my book when I describe the Kabbalotocracy and the intertwining relationship between the three-letter agencies, government, the high priest of Hollywood, because if they could stop lying, they'd have nothing to say. So anyways, I go on like that, so I don't want to get on a tangent there. I think
we could go on for this forever, and I can't wait to finish the book because this is golden. So I kind of was a little early, so let's
before we do that,
go ahead, because I'm
Jamie's primary goal in life is to become a cryptocurrency millionaire.
That's not it.
I know he's chomping at the bit about that.
I'm just trying to see where we're going in the future.
So I have kind of an interesting question, or maybe a little bit of a insight with some of this. I remember taking economics, and I took macro. That was about the only class that I took in economics. I absolutely loved the subject. Aced it, hardly cracked the book. It just kind of made sense and flowed. It was just kind of common sense, just the macro part of it. But one part of that was the employment rate. Right now, we had up until about 6 months ago, kind of a record high unemployment rate. Now we are at a record high employment rate, yet we are still seeing record high inflationary rates. Even though we are seeing wages go up, employment go up, and inflation go up. There's something there that doesn't really correlate. Can you explain how that might not be working out?
Well, there's a couple of theories. If we go back, and you took a macro course, right? Mm-hmm. The theory of, the last vestige of John Maynard Keynes, and incident in my book, I go through Keynes, Adam Smith. Remember, I studied in Scotland, so you can see where I might be a little bit partial there. I go through Milton Friedman, so on and so forth. So in terms of that, I think the unemployment situation is twofold, and I can't nail this with complete documentation. Mm-hmm. You and I learned when we went to business school in the early 60s. Phillips from Australia is an Australian economist, right? I had to look him up in my book, and I got so dizzy writing some of this stuff. There was a choice that government could make, because even politicians could understand this. You could either have high inflation and low unemployment, or high unemployment and low inflation. So people understood that. They go, I'd want to make fiscal and policy to support this. So what happened then is they had the concept, you've heard of it, stagflation, high unemployment and high inflation. But then you're proposing a third phenomena for me. You're saying there's high inflation and low unemployment, but you're also saying that there's something like contracting the economy. And there's this word I learned off this show that I watch, and he's actually linked in with me, and Gerald Celente on the Trends Research, and he calls it dragflation. In other words, you're going to get inflation and you're going to get a contraction of GDP.
Yeah.
And, I don't want to get technical on the GDP, but I don't believe the numbers because
Correct.
Yeah.
they're goosed as well. And that's a separate conversation, that we could have. But I don't want to go too far off tangent. So I think you've got dragflation. The other thing that I want to say, Jason, if I could, is I believe that, I stayed at home. I drank my beer. You gave me my stymie checks. These, they were whatever they were smoking. They were watching reruns of Godzilla versus King Kong, so on and so forth. That Godzilla has a lot of anger management issues, right? No idea how that Godzilla can pick up girls. Okay, no, that's a bad approach with women. But anyways, they watched that and they said, you know what, Jeremy, Jason, I've been at home for a year and I've been trained as a Fiat slave for the last 25 years. And, I don't like my boss. I don't like my job. And I got to find some other way to do stuff. So people are going to go, I'm going to live through the cracks. So your participation rate is lower as well. And I think you have a lot of baby boomers retiring.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It could be a combination. Like someone needs to do a deep study. The more you learn in this world, you become very, I think we all do. I become very humble and I realize how little I know. I hope that didn't discourage you or take
Oh,
you.
no.
I think about it every
fine.
time.
I have come to accept that I am the all-knowing, and Jamie.
I know
he
a
is
little bit
subordinate a
about
little bit,
everything.
but
No,
yeah.
whatever.
We
This guy over
understand
here,
not
he's-
everybody knows as much as what we do.
Crazy. But knowledge is key. Knowledge is key, and continuing to
Yes.
learn. And the more that you realize that, like there's still more to learn.
Mhm.
I feel like it helps you grow as a person. And it's
And
interesting that you bring up.
interesting as well.
It does. It's interesting you bring up dragflation because that's one term that I've kind of been looking into as to why we have, it's obvious you have so many people who are still unemployed and still, they're still talking about, minimum household income. Well, not minimum household income, but, basic income for to pull certain universal income. That's what I was looking for. Universal income to pull some people out of the calculation for GDP. And they say that if you're below a certain level, then the government's just going to pay you to stay home, or if you're above a certain age. And really what that does is take them out of the calculation, which means that you could forever have low unemployment because you're not counting for certain people.
Or if you factor it into where if they are unemployed for a certain amount of time, then they are perceived as no longer looking for gainful employment,
which means that they can be pulled out as well.
Exactly.
So you're really talking about a good 6% or so of the population that you can pull out of the calculation for it. And then when you look at that and you compare it to other things like the national debt and things like that, then it makes everything look better. So it's a numbers game, which is awful because then you can change that per presidency.
Mm-hmm. So Jamie just triggered something on my mind. Before we jump into his topic that he was wanting to get into, I have one more thing that I would like to do. Is there ever, and do you see a time when the U.S. or any major country throughout the world may start actually defaulting on their loans because of how high of the debt that they're running?
Ooh, that's a good one. It is
a good one.
Sovereign status protect them.
Yes. So I'm going to go back to unemployment just for 15 seconds.
Yes. Please.
Jason hit it spot on. It's called, I believe it's the U3, because I wrote about the U3 unemployment rate, U6, just technical terms. In other words, once you're off your unemployment assistance, you're off the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't, again, I don't want to repeat it. We don't know. It's a combination of, I ate my popcorn at home and I watched reruns of Saturday Night Fever and his suit's still nice and white and it's all good. And, and you got the girl at the end and, or reruns of Scarface, I'm giving my age away now. So anyways, you're talking about debt default. And I listened to Alistair MacLean. The guy's a brilliant former banker from Britain. Yes. And I learned stuff off him. I listened to other shows, because I learned stuff. So in answering your question, I extensively go into what we call the House of Cards as a chapter in my book on the Practical MBA in economics.
Okay.
And specifically, I'm going to give you some debt. The Europeans are bust, okay? And now with Germany's position of losing their industrial might because of the sanctions or whatever happened, I'm not going to get into the war. I'm going to be apolitical. But basically, Germany's becoming a vassal state of the United States. In other words, if Germany falls financially, economically speaking, that's the end of Europe.
Yes.
It's done. You have some industrial base in France. The British still have a little bit in the north because I used to make one of my products in northern part of England, and the Italians, yeah, they still have a bit. There just isn't a lot of industrial base there, but there's a great penchant for welfare addiction, social entitlement addiction, and eventually the house of cards will come down. Let's talk about the United States, and that's a number that we can all relate to. The debt is $32 trillion. Okay, so you take $32 trillion and you're at $270,000 per American household, assuming 3.3 people per American household. You can do the numbers. Johnson, and there was another one too, conservatively speaking, they have what they call legacy obligations, pension, mention, state, police department that retires, the fire department, the emergency services, teachers, what have you. There's at least another $70 trillion underfunded liabilities is what they call them. I'm using the right word now. Mm-hmm. And so in my book, I added the 31 and 70, and you're looking at close to over $900,000 per American household. And nobody is asking the politicians. They don't up here in Canada. I mean, we have our prime minister, and they don't ask him. They go, sir, what's your cash flow plan to reduce the deficit to zero and stop living off the avails of my industrious outcome because I'm a carpenter, I'm a plumber, I run a business, I'm a crosswalk attendant. We do all these things. So the industrious are being punished through a taxation system. So I'm answering your question. In Canada, when you are making, let's say, $65,000 a year, which is not even, it's borderline middle class these days. I'm not going to go into it, but into the real hard details. You're paying approximately 53% of your money in taxation. We pay 13% in my province of Ontario, VAT tax, value added tax. That's on top of the other communist taxes, right? Mm-hmm. So, it was the 1970s, and I'm a little boy, and I go, Dad, how did they let that Premier Kosygin from the Soviet Union come to Canada to preach communism? He goes, son, he's not here preaching communism in Canada. He's coming here to learn communism from Canadians. That's what he said to me, right? That's what he said. He's coming here as a learning mission, right? And my dad had good humor, so this is the deficit. And when you see the debt ceiling, I'm not going to give you political prescriptions, but in Canada, every year that if you go 5% in a hole, let me take that off your pension as a member of parliament or as a congressperson and what have you. But we're living in a cabalotocracy. It's a kleptocracy, right? I know there's some really nice folks in politics. So I don't want to brush them all with one big brush, but they're sitting there with a mission to hawk and steal. And if they didn't stop lying, like the media, they'd have nothing to say.
Yeah,
that's valid.
Yeah, I think that just from a general perspective, just about every politician can be painted with that wide brush.
Yeah, at least if not all the time, sometime.
Yes. All right. So
let's get into it.
Yeah, just go ahead, Jamie. I know.
All right. So we've talked about this a couple times. Once you first brought it up, I couldn't stop thinking about it. In chapter 17 of your book, we start talking about, the future capitalism, this dystopia that's coming. Do you see us going to a cashless society at some point? And how do we get away from this or into this?
Well, I'm going to show you how we're going to get into this. To get out of this is, you got to remember, we're addicted to government. Mm. They can't live without us. And we can't live without them. because obviously there's no way you can educate your children without government, right? Because at the end of the day, I think Bertrand Russell wrote in the history of Western, I read a book that I integrated into mine. It was the history of Western philosophy. Government needs two things to stay in power: a good diet of propaganda and a monopoly on education, and then they're fine. So just generally speaking, and I don't want people to get worked up and saying, we're losing our freedoms, because freedom is only 1/4% of human history. The rest is we've been completely under tyranny for thousands of years. That's another story. But let me pick, and I'm going to go off the top of my head. My book was 500 and something pages, but it's an easy read. I had to read that section again, and then I built on it. I'm going to give you an example here. You talked about, let's say the currency collapses and the treasury is in financial trouble. The central banks are in financial trouble. The US dollar, people are going, no, I'll take gold off you. I don't want that paper money with whoever's face is on there. And then the government will come along with a solution, right? Because they created the crisis. So they come along with a solution to prepare for their next crisis. And they turn around and they go, you know what? I'm going to tell you something, Jeremy. Those bank robbers are using cash, and those drug dealers are using cash, and we're going to put an end to bank robbers. We're going to put an end to drug dealers and money laundering and those bad guys, and all your money is going to be central digital bank currency. So what they're going to do is put people on it. People like you are awake, and you're going, well, what's wrong with that? Well, once I have you on central digital bank currency, the way I do it is when I manufactured my crisis is this. Well, I want people to come along. So the plebeians are easy to bring along. I'll give them UBI $2,000 a month. I'll placate them. They're allowed to vote every 2 to 4 years for their next oppressor. If they'll be so hooked on even more government assistance. If they come up for air, we'll give them another injection in the arm, and bring them back down. $2,200. It's not enough. They'll come down. When I come up and Jason, Jeremy, you come up to them and say, you guys are living under oppression. No, we're not. We're allowed to vote. Of course, you're going to vote for your next oppressor. So I got you on central bank digital currency. And then once I've got you on that, I really heard that you guys went to a protest last weekend. I will think about perhaps freezing your account. You showed up at the wrong protest, not the one I particularly approved of. I will put money to stimulate. For example, I'll say we need to sell more iPhones in America and more pots in America or pans in America. So I'm going to put $200 in your account, and you can spend only on these 3 items. You're creating artificial demand, price formation. You know what I'm talking about, demand formation. So that's all the technical stuff. But now let me give you the real ugly stuff. You see, when the Soviet Union and the Bolsheviks formed, they didn't have an intelligence service. It wasn't until 1952 that Stalin really established the KGB and the all their spook agencies, because it was the Tsar's time. Mao was always struggling, even in the late 30s, and he was not in power till I believe 47, 48, when the communists took over from the KMT, Chiang Kai-shek. So what he did is both Chairman Mao and Lenin did not have the apparatus. They didn't have the central banks. They did not have Hollywood. They did not have a substantial propaganda network. They did not have the spook agencies. They did not have a powerful currency. They had none of those things. So they had to build these apparatuses of oppression. But what happens now is, see, America is turning around, and all their world, the world leaders and Davos and Charles Schwab, they're turning around and saying, hold on, the Chinese got smart. They're not as foolish as Mao and Lenin. What we will do now is we will let large corporations survive. We will inflate away the middle class, because they're the social conscience of our society. Because as being in middle class, I believe in rule of law. I believed in fair play, all these things. We would all, even if you were very wealthy and I was a pauper, I would get treated the same as you in the courts. I believed in all these things. They're the social conscience. We'll inflate them away. We'll keep the plebeians. We'll allow them to vote. I will keep the large corporations. If I need some smaller, medium ones, they can come along for the ride. I'll make them lower members of the cabal autocracy. Just like, I want to join the Freemasons so I can be part of that big in crowd. So, poor Joe, I can be maybe an entry-level Freemason. I'm happy now, right?
Yeah.
Because the rest are not. So I keep this central control. I merge, they live off the fruitions parasitically off the large corporations. And what they do through other members of the cabal, like the media and so forth, they will sing the same song. You're seeing it already. Yeah. They're not going to squash capitalism. They're going to live off it like parasites. And now you have a sustainable communism. It just needed to be tweaked for sustainable tyranny. And, and the fans will be happy. And, we can, and if they get bored, we can put up balloons and call the Air Force to shoot them down. And we can have news stories every day. And we can have MMA fights. And instead of, reading the Practical MBA on economics, we're going to argue in bars about who really was the best Super Bowl team. Anyways, just like
the critical thinkers, you just kind of make them seem crazy because that's not what the educational system that's propagandized up is teaching them. It's all cyclical.
Yeah, you hit what de Tocqueville wrote in his book, Democracy in America, on the head. Americans, because of the way that we perceive our lives, perceive the American dream, will always be more interested in what we can attain the next day as opposed to ensuring something has a long-lasting effect. So we are always going to have, to quote another one, Karl Marx, opium of the masses.
Well, think about how we even plan, right? When we look at governmental bonds, right? We do 2, 5, 10, no longer do we have the 20, 30-year bond anymore. It's the same thing as like when you look at, say the People's Republic of China, they have a 50-year bond. You know what I mean? Because they're thinking long term, whereas other, we're not. We got to get back in the mindset of thinking, how do we plan our society out over the next 2 to 3 generations, not tomorrow.
Yeah, and he literally put into perspective of what China is doing right now with their social credits.
Yes,
with what they're doing. And we are starting to move into that direction with the ESG credits.
By doing the similar style of what he was talking about. Like they're still keeping the capitalism model, but they're doing it through through companies because they have not dwindled down the middle class to the level that they think that we won't fight back. Scary times.
And if you don't sing my song, I have to accuse both of you of misinformation. And then what will happen is... And then I have to digitally tar and feather you and put you in the digital graveyard in Salem along with the witches and just kind of, is that the right word? Cancel you. And so, because the minions have spoken on Twitter, they've spoken on Facebook, because whatever I do in my life, Silicon Valley tells me how to think. It's a gulag. It's a digital. It's a digital gulag is what it is, especially Google and the likes. And you saw what happened with Elon Musk. He came out and he says the 3-letter agencies were showing up at Twitter every week, literally.
Yep.
And guess what? I stopped beating, the best punching boy for the last 2 to 4 years for the mainstream media and Silicon Valley was Trump. Well, you know what? Never mind him. Did you know that Twitter is not making money? And they never made money, bro. They never made it. He's turning it around. Did you know that Elon Musk was an axe murderer in his other life or stuff like that? And when this big cabal autocracy in the future of tomorrow comes, people will have their hands out for the government and they're going to solve inflation. I'm going to tell you something. With government solving inflation, that's like calling the axe murderer to the scene of the crime and saying, by the way, can you do CPR?
Yeah. Who did? Hey, I think you did it. You're covered in blood. Did you kill that person? No? Okay, well, you help us find him?
Yeah. You got me going. Oh, by the way, I like your set. It's really cool. It makes it very spontaneous to talk with you, both of you, and the set. And it's very kind of home and back on the ranch, and
That's how we like to keep it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely homey. Literally, this set is in my home. So I have one last question with this, and we're kind of running a little bit short on time with this.
Okay.
What my question is there anything that we can do to prevent this economic dystopia that we're heading down towards right now? What can we do outside of instilling Jamie and I to come in and correct everything? Is there anything that can be done?
Okay, borrowing that you call Batman and he can't help you. Okay, I'm borrowing that one.
Yeah.
I watched one of your shows, and I'm probably repeating this. You need to do a couple. I'm just going to talk about safety of currency. You need to have gold and or silver, because when our primal fears take over and your ATMs could shut down, or people go, I don't trust that paper. They'll always trust gold. Go read the Weimar Republic when inflation ran like in the thousands of %. That's one. What can the average, person do? I'm not going to look at a business perspective. I'm going to look at it as a person can do. They can, first of all, should have a bit of extra food, nutritious food with you. Bad things can happen. I'm not saying we're going to have complete food shortages, but if the Ministry of Propaganda says there's food shortages and people hoard, you'll get one. It'll self-prophesize. So gold, silver. We're going to see how Bitcoin works out. I was a proponent of it. I'm not saying I'm not. The government's going to eventually, that's going to be competition to the central digital bank currency. I can't give you, I'm not going to diss on Bitcoin. It has its pluses. I'm not talking about the other digital currencies there.
Yeah.
The other one that I like is you can turn around and say there's inflation in energy, buy some oil stocks.
Okay.
You can go to Bloomberg and buy on margin 5,000, 3,000, use that. You think it's going to happen on food? Buy some food stocks. One is PDBC. I can send them to you guys later.
Yes.
I think it is. If I'm wrong, PDBC. The other one is you got to get ahead of the curve. 3.5% is not even going to cover a quarter of inflation.
Yep.
I believe another one is JPI. Is they give you, it's JP Morgan. They give you about 10 to 12% dividend on your money, right? And you can get out of there anytime. So just kind of look at it that way. If you don't want to buy the physical gold, there's a company in Canada that trades on the U.S. market and the Canadian market called Sprott Capital. They have palladium, and it's not paper gold. The palladium, gold, silver, all these uranium, all these funky metals, and it's held in the Canadian Mint. So you are buying something solid there, if I can say that. And you need to look around and say, where's my inflation? I'm going to buy a little bit of that company that, my food prices are going up, so I'm going to buy, I gave you one of them. And that, if I look carefully on my Yahoo, that's where I keep my stuff, I can be exact for you. If you give me a second here, bear with me. I'm looking at my computer shamelessly. I apologize, gentlemen. And if it's on here, one of the symbol for gold for Sprott is PHYS. Okay. You can buy that. The other one for that high income dividend stock is JEPI, the JP Morgan Equity Premium. This is not stock advice. That's what I'm not here from. But just do your own research,
Absolutely.
and don't sit there. And you should have some cash handy. You should have cash handy because if people get scared. That fear that instinctive fear takes over, and you're going to go to the media, and the problem is that people are still listening to the mainstream media.
Yeah.
Older people. And anyways, that was my speech.
Well, sir, we want to say thank you for coming on to
Absolutely.
the show. You have been a wealth of knowledge, a virtual
you.
fountain. We'll use
Yeah.
that
And when you finish the third book, we're going to have you back to talk about it.
Oh, for sure. I would love to come back. I wish you both well, and I thank you, both of you, for having me on your show, and continued success, and just keep going at it.
Well, thank you, sir. Yeah, we don't know how to do anything other than that.
Yeah, we're just going to keep going and staying positive. But thank you for your time. And
he's being positive. I'm just going to be realist.
Got to be the optimist. Got to be the optimist.
We had some good fun there. Take care. We'll see you.
Have a good one, sir.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Well, that was really good. That was very insightful, entertaining, and humorous. The humor kind of threw a better light on the grim nature of what we are staring down the barrel of.
Yeah, I think we're in a tough spot in the world right now. And, poli-sci, international relations, always talks about the fact of when we get away from religion, that's where international affairs comes in, when we start talking about globalization, things like that. And that is where we as Christians and Americans need to stand up. And that's where we need to fight. We need to make sure that some of these things that are happening don't happen. And I think a big leader into that is one world currency, and how we stop the central banking system and things from that nature of doing what they're doing right now.
Yeah. I'm right there along with you on that one. But as with everything in life, just like death and taxes, we have reached the inevitable conclusion of this episode. But with that, we do want to give a quick reminder to make sure that we are encouraging our viewers to hitting the like button and the share button on any of the content that they do run across on any of the platforms that we release our content on, as well as making sure you're hitting the subscribe button. That way you'll always stay up to date on anything that we do produce and that we release, so you'll never miss a single moment of anything that Jamie and I do. We also encourage our viewers to go to our website at conservatives.org and hit that sponsor tab in the upper right-hand corner or the lower right-hand corner and become a sponsor today, and help Jamie and I be able to stop everything that we just had our conversation about, because we all know, Jamie and I know everything. The world revolves around us, and that's just how things go.
I can't even take him seriously when he does this.
We also want to say a quick thank you to our affiliates. Our first one being Net News Networks. You can find Net News Network at netnewsnetwork.net. We want to say a quick thank you to Veterans for America First and their media arm of Vet Voice. So make sure you are looking for Vet Voice on every major social media and media platform. So Jamie, with that in mind, you want to give us your final thought?
Yes. So I've said this for a while. If you are looking to run for commission in the city of Rome, please contact me. We will be here to help. Also want to remind everyone that county convention for Floyd County, as well as all of the other 58 counties, including us, right? In the state of Georgia, we'll have our county conventions on March 11th. This is where you elect your county executive boards, your county party leaders, as well as you vote to see who goes to the district and state conventions. So this is very important when it comes to being a conservative. And so I want to remind everyone to get out on March 11th if you are going to be a delegate or alternate. The other thing I want to say is just, I'll
tell you what, think on it, stew on it for a moment. I want to add a little something to what you had just said there for a moment there. Reach out to us if you're wanting to run for any local elected position in the state of Georgia.
Yeah,
we will help you, get you in contact with who you need to speak to. We'll help you understand the process, and we'll help you find a way and find a path forward and how to do that.
We know a very reputable consulting firm who's looking to help with local elections.
So what was that last part before I cut you off?
The last part really was just, like now more than ever, it's time to make sure that we continue to fight for conservative values and not fight other conservatives. That in itself is going to be major when it comes to these next couple of elections, because as you can tell, the Democrats are moving in nonpartisan elections and taking over. And it's time to get this whole idea that Georgia's blue out of the way. The only way that happens is if we have conservatives fighting with conservatives and not having conservatives fighting conservatives. That's it.
True words never been spoken. So with that, this is Conservatives Talk.